Back when DirectX 11 capable video cards were released, a new hardware feature was introduced. That was real-time dynamic tessellation of geometry, which allowed us to increase the polygon count of objects on the video card using a displacement texture map. This allows for a greater level of physical detail in objects without necessarily having to model that detail. This works great for things like bricks in a wall, which in the past would simply have been left flat, and a normal or bump map would be used to simulate the bumpiness of each brick. However, displacement maps are also a decent way to create special effects on a surface. Let's look at a simple material technique that will let us add a shag effect to the rug in our scene. But before we do that, let's take a look at the source asset in 3ds Max. In 3ds Max, here we have our rug, and you're going to find it under the Scene Explorer under Small Props, and then SM Rug 001. Let's go ahead and hide everything else so that we can focus on the rug. It's a pretty simple object. It's composed of two pieces. We have the black border edge here, and then the rug part in the center, the main part of the asset. And this is the part that we'll be displacing. The first thing you'll notice about the rug is that it is heavily tessellated. This is because the displacement mapping material effect will work better in this case when the model is more tessellated than usual. Normally a rug like this could work as simply two triangles making up a plane. But because we're going to be adding a really detailed shag effect that looks like carpet, we're going to need more tessellation to get some better detail out of this. Now, of course, tessellation is happening dynamically on the video card, and this rug will be tessellated further than this using the material. So it's possible we could go with even fewer triangles here than what we have, and then let the material do most of the work. Just keep in mind that when you're working with dynamic tessellation, having a little extra detail in your mesh is going to help the shader along. But keep in mind, the more tessellated your mesh is, and the more meshes you have that are tessellated like this, it may have an impact on the final performance of your scene. The other thing to take note of is the UV mapping of the asset. Let's go ahead and put an unwrap modifier on it and then open that up. Now, there's nothing special going on here in our UV mapping. We just want to make sure that we have good, clean UV maps. And generally, I like to have UV maps for displacement that are like light maps, where you have no overlapping UV shells, and preferably everything's laid out in the 0 to 1 space. We can see here the border of the rug is not in the 0 to 1 space, but that will be fine. Nothing is overlapping it. To get started, let's make sure that we're in the exercises map file under content, maps, and then exercises. And when you load it up, press G to hide the game objects, and we're ready to begin working on our rug. Let's jump into our working directory and create a new material. And we'll call this material m_rug. The first thing we want to do to our new material is to enable tessellation. Under Details, we'll scroll down until we find the tessellation rollout. And here in the top entry D3D11 tessellator, we want to change that from no tessellation. We're going to use flat tessellation. We're also going to enable crack-free displacement, and we'll leave adaptive tessellation checked. We can also control the maximum amount of displacement here, but we'll just leave that at the default value of 0. And we're ready to continue. The first thing we'll need to do, of course, is to add our base color. Now, obviously for that, we're going to use a texture map. So we'll hold down T on the keyboard and create our texture sample. We can go ahead and input that into the base color of our rug. And let's go ahead and find our texture sample. I'm going to use the drop down here and search for rug. And T_rug_D is what we're looking for. Now we're going to use our custom material function to control the tiling. So we'll right click and search for tiling. And then we'll plug the UV tiling into the UV's input here. And of course, we'll need to input all of this information here. Let's go ahead and do that now. We'll add 3 vector 2s to control the panner speed, rotation center, and UV tiling, and a scalar input for our rotation angle. Let's leave that value at 0. And our panner speed, we'll leave that at 0 as well. Rotation center, we can leave at 0. We'll set UV tiling to 1 and 1.25. Let's go ahead and add a roughness scalar parameter here. We're going to set that to a value of 0.9, and then we'll plug that into roughness. We're also going to need our normal map, so we'll create a texture sample there. We'll use the same tiling node and plug that into the UVs. Plug our normal map in, and we're going to search for rug again in our normal sample. There we go, T rug in. Let's have a quick look at that normal map so we can see what it looks like. Our normal map for the rug is a high frequency noise map, basically, with lots of little bumps and imperfections. And this brings us to the important part, and that is our tessellation. So with tessellation enabled, we can see we have world displacement and tessellation multiplier. World displacement is where we will be plugging in our displacement map. Tessellation multiplier will control how many polygons are added to the mesh in order for the world displacement map to do its job. The greater the amount of tessellation, the more detailed our displacement will be. Let's go ahead and plug a scalar value into our tessellation multiplier. Now we need to add our world displacement map. For that, we're going to need a texture sample. So again, we'll hold down T to create that. For our displacement map in this case, we're simply going to use the rug roughness map. So that's going to be T_rug_R. Let's open that up, and we'll see that this is a simple grayscale image, but it has a rug pattern that matches the normal map. Displacement maps come in two varieties. There's a vector displacement map, which uses an EXR style file. Vector displacement maps allow for things like overhangs and other details that you can't get with a black and white or grayscale image. In this case, we're simply using a grayscale image, and this means that all of the displacement will be straight up from the surface. Now, while we can't create any kind of overhanging effects or anything like that with a grayscale image, this will work perfectly for carpet. We'll need to add another tiling node here, so we'll search for tiling, and we'll plug that into the displacement mapping's UV input. And in this case, we're going to set the tiling to 100 by 100. From here, we're going to need a multiplier so we can control the intensity of our displacement map. So we'll put a multiply here. We're going to pipe in our displacement map texture into the A, and then we'll use a scalar value here going into the B input of our multiply. And we're going to set the default value to 3. This, of course, will control the intensity of the blacks and whites of our displacement map. Next, we need to multiply this value by the world space vertex normals. So we're going to search for vertex normal world space, and we're going to multiply these two together. And that's it. Now we can plug this into our world displacement. One last thing, let's make sure we plug in these other inputs. So we've got a 2 vector, another 2 vector, and a scalar, and we'll plug those into the proper locations, and we can leave them all at 0. With the displacement effect set up in our material, we're ready to tweak the tessellation and displacement intensity parameters to get the look we want. Up next, we'll discuss those settings and look at some issues with displacement mapping, as well as a great trick to correct one of those issues.